Ready when you are.
Pernicious pond life, perfidious potentates, and a pre-epic plenipotentiary. All in this 36th episode of I'll Explain Later, the Doctor Who podcast that's all dolled up for a night on the town with Mike Yates, with Matt Needer,
John West, and our special guest,
Lewis Baston.
Tonight, always a Grimwade, never a chore. So it goes for this mysterious mutation serial. Matthew Waterhouse lays hands on some old fruit in 1980's steamy romp Full Circle.
An angry basement dweller gets a new lease of life after Billy Piper touches his dome and causes his balls to swell. A flagrant attempt to sell the show to a Mormon audience. It's 2005's Dalek.
And John Pertwee penetrates the Holy of Holies, and the head of state tries the same on Joe Grant, all without Alpha Centauri's help. Ambassadorial tension over the last Ferrero Rocher in 1972's The Curse of Peladon.
Okay, hello.
Hi.
So we're back with another set of the hottest of hot takes on Doctor Who, classic and modern. But we're doing things a little differently this month, aren't we, John? Perhaps you'd like to tell us why, or how.
Oh, yes.
Don't tell us why, tell us how.
We are delighted to have with us a guest. We promised that we would have some rotating guests every now and again. Not actually rotating.
I was going to say, and rotating tonight we have.
We're delighted to have the psephological guru and political boffin, writer plus actor, not actor, Lewis Baston. Hello, Lewis.
Hello.
Now, we first met through mutual friends some 5 years ago, something like that. But it was only shortly after that I realised that you were a Doctor Who nerd, really. I think
we're able to sniff each other out.
Yeah, there was a certain degree of there was a certain odour. So a metaphorical one. So how did you come to be involved in that, and how have you kept in touch with fandom, if at all, over the years?
Well, I was a fan of the kind of second half of Tom Baker's time, really. That's when I came to the show and when I was kind of most enthusiastic and fanish about it. I went to the infamous Longleat 83, but
really?
didn't actually get to meet any of the stars because I was I was queuing up and didn't realise that everybody was sort of coming through the holes in the tents and so on. So I didn't figure out.
Well, there was a lot of that from John Nathan Turner for sure.
And then I sort of lost the thread a bit with the sort of Colin and Sylve era. I became a bit embarrassed by my enthusiasm, and by the time I went to college, it was a bit of a sort of forbidden chapter in my personal history. But I was then very glad to kind of reclaim it rather later, and the availability of all the classic series on DVD, for instance. I have a nearly full collection. There is only, I think, one story that I refused to buy for anything over 50p. And
go on.
Delta and the Bannermen.
Oh.
We're yet to...
I think I've got that somewhere, yeah.
We're yet to review it, so thanks, Lewis. I really look forward to that.
Oh, wait, because they're all coming out in those prestige Blu-ray box set editions now, so you can just pick it up on that.
I can indeed, in all the sort of clarity and quality of image that it deserves, yes.
What was that? There was a fanzine you got once, Matt, which... had a cut-out and keep guide to how to use a compass to remove a particular episode or song from a CD or something.
Remember that?
You've not taken a compass to any of this, any of these three serials, I hope.
No,
DVDs are unscathed.
They are. Full Circle is really from the sort of high point of my fanishness. There was something about the combination of Bidmead's kind of approach to scripts and so on, which really sort of gelled with the imagination of this.
He certainly got to work on them, didn't he?
Frankly, kind of nerdish and obnoxious, clever little sod of the age of 10 or 11. Really got into the kind of whole style of the way it was done then. So that was my sort of peak. I experienced Curse of Peladon through reading about it in the Target novelizations, because that was how my generation of fan just absorbed an awful lot of the history of the program.
That was definitely something you were into as well then.
Oh, very much. I have a full collection of those down to about
Wow.
1982 as well.
Wow.
So,
And then Dalek was something you watched on the telly.
watched on the
when it was
telly
on.
with
Yeah.
I think with my mum and dad and everything. Yes, it
And
was
millions of other Brits.
absolutely.
All right, well, let's crack on with it then with Full Circle, as you mentioned, first of all. So this...
Chosen just for you.
Oh,
So Full Circle is the start of the so-called, quote-unquote, E-Space trilogy.
Did anyone accidentally watch the 1998 Michael Palin travelogue?
Is that what you prepared your notes on?
The vague characterisation of a travelling doctor. No.
This is Full Circle. This is the start of the E-Space trilogy from season 18, which is 3 stories in which, as far as I can tell, the Doctor is outside the usual space-time continuum, but otherwise encounters exactly the same problems
Presumably
as he
this
normally seems to. In
This is
normal space.
because the story arc stuff with Romana 1 worked so well.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely.
build on
Right.
that. Yeah.
I thought, why not build on that? So the TARDIS encounters a bit of disruption in space en route to taking Romana back to Gallifrey, slightly against her will. It enters
That's a bit weird, isn't it?
what is, I believe, referred to as a charged vacuum emboitment. Which is, I'm sure, a penalty that I had to pay for something or other once.
I had one of those, that's why I'm late.
And they end up on the planet of Alzarius instead, where the humanoids who live there, the Alzarians, are terrified of the upcoming...
Paddy Kingsland music.
terrified of the score. Terrified of the upcoming Misty season, which sees marshmen rise out of the water and presumably go on some sort of killing spree. So they have retreated into their Starliner, which they have been attempting to maintain for generations in order to get back to their home planet. Along the way, the Doctor and Romana meet their new friend Adric for the first time, who is a bit of a maths geek among the Alzarians, but who's desperate to join the really cool bad boy crew, the Outlaws, who seem to hang around dressed as 1980s.
Is that just a recurrent typo in the script?
I did wonder. I wrote it as Outliers a couple of times. I also like the fact that although it's pronounced Logan, George Baker seems to be playing a character called Login, which I quite liked. I don't know whether that was a bid me computer reference gone too far. But anyway, this is the story where Adric makes his thrilling debut. We are 3 stories.
The barest bones effort to make names sound a bit spacey, so instead of Dexter, it's Dexeter.
And there's Gareth. There's Gareth, isn't there, as
Gareth,
well?
yes, fantastic.
So anyway, Lewis, this is an era of Doctor Who.
This is your era.
This is your era of Doctor Who. This is
Account for it.
It's not
I
the only
take
reason
full
we're here.
responsibility for this incident and several others. Yes.
What do you make of Full Circle, Lewis?
I like it. I admire it more than I like it, but I do actually like it. It is. I enjoyed watching it again, and I admired the sort of intelligence of it almost. It is actually quite a clever piece of work thematically, and it makes satisfying sense in that clues are sort of seeded through it. It builds to a not an entirely surprising but pretty kind of good kind of resolution. It's also sort of a bit morally complex. There aren't any baddies in it, which is something I like in a script, and it plays around with some sort of unusual areas of science. I mean, we're used to kind of taking liberties with the rules of physics in Doctor Who. This one takes liberties with how evolution works, and I don't mind that. It's a set up for a story. It's great, and it also takes a little bit of a look at politics and sociology almost. That we have one of the little things that Bidmead seeds into it. I mean, I think his reputation for doing hard science is grossly overdone, but he's quite good at a bit of the soft...
As anyone who knows anything about
Yes.
science will tell you.
as he does a nice bit of sort of softer science here with the sociology of how the people of the Starliner work and the beliefs that communities generate about the marsh creatures and how that serves a sort of purpose of cementing this type D oligarchy, I think Romana calls it at one point, in place. So it actually has a plausible semi-plausible social political setup in this microcosm of this Starliner. And it's also quite rich in that some of the things are left a bit unsaid. Like it's not clear why the marsh creatures hate the Starliner dwellers. It's not sort of spelt out anywhere in it. But you can actually do a bit of sort of empathizing and thinking and think, to the marsh creatures, these people are just sort of stuck up. They're distant from their roots. They're kind of these dry, technical dwellers. They've turned their back on the sort of rhythm of life on the planet, and they think they're better than the marsh creatures. So you can sort of, there's enough material in the script and in the production that you can actually find reasons for stuff, which I quite like. It's not just a sort of marshmen are evil and violent just because that's the way they are.
Yeah.
So I like it. And I think also one of the kind of nice things about it is that to me, it's an example of how script editing can work. It's actually quite a well done bit of script editing, in my humble opinion, in that you had a young writer, Andrew Smith, coming up with some fantastic 17 fantastic,
Lord, really?
Fantastic ideas, very sort of mature, intelligent look at things, and he and Bidmead obviously did have quite a good creative partnership on this one.
Yes, it's not like sort of once you get into the Cartmel era where you also have a lot of very sort of green writers doing their first script, where sort of the ideas might be there, but you feel like they're not being sort of hammered into some kind of shape.
Indeed. And I think in Full Circle, the ideas are sort of refined and made to work. And I think the comparison with the Cartmel era is a valid one. And when you look also at sort of inexperienced writers in other periods of script editing, like the sort of horrifying Time Lash, for instance. I mean, something good might have been able to have been refined out of that, but it just wasn't done. And Full Circle, the work was done. It's something that Andrew Smith can be immensely proud of.
Yeah.
Young Man wrote, to my mind, one of the more sort of intelligent, deep pieces that Doctor Who was doing at this time.
Well, no, I think I'm sort of inclined to agree that I think I don't think this is necessarily top tier Doctor Who, but I liked it a lot more than I thought I was going to, and I think it teases out its mysteries very nicely. I think it's a decent little mystery. I actually think, because when we did last year at some point, we did The Face of Evil, which sort of stands comparison, I think, as it's another crashed Starliner set up, your multiple generations down, mythology's kind of grown up. And I think in terms of dealing with what the culture that might grow out of that situation, this I think is a good deal more interesting than The Face of Evil.
Can I just get my head around a plot?
Yeah, certainly.
So the people on the Starliner have evolved from the pond life.
Yes.
So who crashed the ship down there in the first place?
So,
because that's dealt with in half a line, right?
I know,
at the end,
and this is actually a note that I made, that it does rather fumble its explanation, which I think is a good one. So essentially, the ship is from the planet Pterodon. It's crashed. The Marshmen wipe out the creatures, and then because the Alzarians exist in these three evolutionary states at once of being spiders, Marshmen, and humanoids, the humanoids evolve to take the place of the humans that were on the ship, and that's how they don't know how to pilot the ship, but they've absorbed everything else from the knowledge that's there. There's a bit of the manual missing telling you how the ship can take off. But yes, that's for something that's sort of building towards it. It is thrown away almost in half a line. Kind of done.
So the Doctor's coming through a corridor.
I know.
There's
a lot of else going on,
and then
yeah.
Well,
it does rather. The
fact that I couldn't be bothered to go back and rewind it just for that half a line probably tells you how I.
So you were not feeling this, John.
Do you know what? The funny thing is that I do actually, sitting here having to listen to what you've been saying, Lewis and Matt. I do actually genuinely agree with you. I think there's a lot going on there in the script, which I really do like. The ideas, the stuff that you were talking about, how the Marshmen find the Starliner people stuck up or whatever. It reminded me a little bit of, and those themes of evolution, it reminds me a little bit of the A-level discussions we used to have about Thomas Hardy's Return of the Native, about groups of people and how they're best suited. The Heath people and how they're better suited to the environment than incomers or people who sort of have ideas above their station. It seems to me quite funny that the marsh people seem to be better adapted to their surroundings than the people who've evolved.
And their distrust of the humanoids is sort of justified, given how, I think, unpleasant that stuff around the experimentation on the child marsh creatures. I mean, that gets...
You have to go as far as... So in terms of the sort of body horror stuff, you have to go perhaps as far as Mind Warp to see similar... in Trial of a Time Lord, to see similar kind of disgusting.
I mean, because there was at one point where I thought, oh, right, we're actually going to go into the vivisection of a child here, which is something that we're about to see, which obviously it rose away from that.
Also,
but it's about to go there.
To be fair to Peter Grimwade, who directed this, that shot is held, and the way it's framed and the way it's cut, such that your assumption is the Doctor's going to run in and save the day at the last second, but actually he's in the chamber. He's not in the he's not in the science lab, and so he's not in a position to help. And that knife does cut flesh before things go wrong. So there's a lot to like in the thematics of this. I mean, I know what you're saying about Bidmead and science, but there is an awful lot of experiments and microscopes and stuff like that, and it doesn't really aid the plot to have someone peering down at a lens. I think it's I don't know. It's not. It doesn't do much for me. And yet, despite the fact that there's quite a lot going on, that's quite. I mean, we've seen a little bit of season 18 stuff, I think.
We've done the previous two stories, so Leisure Hive and Meglos.
You get a bit more of that fatalistic Doctor, sombre, even unfeeling, particularly at the beginning, where he seems to be in a bit of a mind fog, not able to empathise with or relate to Romana, who was not wanting to go.
I really like Tom Baker in this season. I think it's definitely a stage on from the Graham Williams era, where I think he's actually sort of actively working against the material quite a lot of the time, and I think his need to sort of deconstruct things or put his own stamp on things, I think quite often undermines the material. He can do. I mean, he's by the time we get to Logopolis, it's positively funereal, and I think that is the point, that they are dismantling the character slowly across this season. I like the broody Tom Baker.
Yeah, me too. So, there's a lot on the positive side of the ledger. So I come at this, I feel it's a curate's egg. I'm not saying it's all bad. But there's just something about the way that Doctor Who is being put together at this point that, and I'm possibly slightly damning it for what I know is to come, but there's just something about the way that it's being put together which is cheaper somehow. And I don't actually mean cheaper in terms of sets or budgets. It just seems less glossy, less coherent, less conditioned, if you will. And
it hasn't been left in the tank long enough to really develop a proper flavour.
Yeah, and there are stupid decisions made, like having that bunch of bad adolescent actors on screen for such a length of time. The decision to have Adric there in the first place. We end up, just in design terms, and I'm not. One could, I suppose, damn the whole of the late 70s and into the 80s, and God only knows that Star Trek: The Motion Picture was doing much the same at this point. But we end up in another planet of peace-loving pastel shade Herberts. Just running around in I don't know. There's something ghastly about that stock yellow agrarian futuristic, and also never in the history of television that I've seen have I been so bored by a scene of fruit stealing. The supposed tension of when Adric's meant to be nicking those bloody watermelons. I just can't. There are so many things that fatally undermine, maybe not fatally, they significantly undermine what are, and I agree with this, so very, very well-developed thematic tranches, if you will, that interlock and play around. But, the stupid fruit stealing stuff, the pointlessness of having those kid rebels, they don't really add anything to the plot. They could easily just be some guards who they end up encountering and building rapport
not even
with
the powerful motivation it adds for George Baker's character to really emote. Is that
George Inspector Wexford Baker, I think you'll find. Yeah, there's just the little things that really piss me off from a dramatic perspective, like Decider Draith. Poor fellow. He'd have been fine if Adric hadn't been nicking those watermelons. That's the first thing. And the second thing is he gives him a very simple instruction. Tell Dexeter we've come full circle. And he only remembers about halfway through episode 4 because he's a prick.
when the Doctor mentions it.
When he's had like 2.5 episodes. When he's had...
You had one job.
And he's had 2.5 episodes back on the Starliner to work out what he should be or thereabouts. So there's just something that's gumming up the system a bit about making this truly effective television, which I think is particularly annoying when I agree with you, Lewis, that there's quite a lot going on here that does work.
I mean, I think I agree and disagree to an extent. I mean, I think, yeah...
PlayStation.
Yeah. It's possibly forecasting ahead to sort of, this... And Season 18 really is a decisive break with the previous one in terms of how... the show makes a point of arriving in the 80s, even though this is only being produced a year after the final Graham Williams season.
Yeah.
There is a decisive attempt to make it look different, and that is a look that sustains it through the next few years. And as you say, yes, people wandering around on sort of vacuum-formed perspex sets in pastel shade pajamas, endless... sort of stories that draw you into these community conflicts that you couldn't really give much of a shit about. But, I mean, I'm not sure if the extent... I mean, I personally feel this is a step up over a lot of the stories we've seen from the previous season. I think there is, as Lewis says, kind of real control being put into how the script's put together. I know, John, I suspect it might just be that you're sort of completely allergic to anything that Peter Grimwade touches, but I think the direction in this is great.
I agree. I think
the direction's really good.
I think there's some great stuff there. I mean, the
location stuff in particular, I think is terrific. It's
Black Park, I think, which is a very kind of familiar location, but there is a sort of, they do manage to imbue it with a little bit of
feels sweaty
exoticism. Sweaty, and you get a few Grimwade tropes coming in, like sort of lads horsing around in the water here. So I mean, starting as you mean to go on, really. I
think there are some well shot pieces in it. I won't deny that. Actually, the first scene where the Marshmen come out of the water,
sort of bubbling up,
is really good.
Lovely sort of Black Lagoon kind of stuff.
Yeah, totally. I don't deny that, and I think actually, like I said, the really, really effective where they're about when Dexeter's about to perform the vivisection on the live. Also, it's so creepy. He says, this experiment will only work if the subject is awake. So, yeah, it's just really horrid. But the fact that it's framed in such a way that you are convinced that the Doctor's about to make a heroic entrance into the lab, and actually his heroic entrance is into the hall where he can only say, don't do it. He's not in a position to really affect the change. That's skillfully done, I think. It wrong foots you, and that's something that's done. That's something that's very much done, through the viewfinder and in the cutting room. That's not something that's there in the script or the well, it might be, but it's not there in the script and the performances as such. So I don't want to say that everything about it is bad, even in terms of the direction and cutting. It's more in the design and strategic choices, I suppose. The design flaws really begin, and that's not just visual design. The score is atrocious.
Yeah, Paddy Kingsland isn't very good.
I mean, intrusive to the point of destroying any of the dramatic tension that you might have. There are some truly excellent scenes in this. One of my favourites is in episode 4 where Wexford, what's his name?
Logan.
Yeah, Kenny Loggins.
Kenny Logan.
So Logan is desperate for them to act, to make a decision about the incursions from the marshmallows, and the other two doddery oligarchs are sort of deciding, but they're not deciding. They're discussing the intricacies of the books that they have, and
they lapse into this sort of bureaucratic language as
yes.
well. They
yes.
kind of adopt this sort of persona of these bumbling fools.
Well, exactly, and we'll come back to bureaucracy, I suspect, when we come to talk about Peladon, because it's quite interesting that. But, we're saying, well, the summary of all this knowledge is that we do nothing. And that's a nice little beat that isn't necessary for the kind of sciencey elements of the plot or the science fiction or the stuff to do with evolution or being suited to your environment, but it's just a nice little colour that they've added to the canvas. And so again, there's lots to like in it, but there's just something about it, and maybe it's something I'm bringing to the table because I feel like I'm seeing in real time the rot setting in, stuff beginning to take place that will take the show in a direction I really don't like. So it's probably partly my fault, but I just feel that there's something about
We'd never blame you for Full Circle, John.
There's something about the pastel shade shonkiness that I feel is setting in, and the music, it just doesn't. I can't take it seriously enough, and that's sad because I think a lot of work has gone into it.
There's one thing I'd ask Lewis, because you were watching this at the time. Did this season sort of feel like a relaunch, or did it feel like the next season?
Oh, it felt really like a complete change.
Yeah.
I mean, it announced its intentions straight off with a change in the title, music and sequence, and the sort of boom of it, and the sort of, what was it? It's the howl.
It's loud,
music.
Isn't it? Yeah.
It's loud, it's brash, it's assertive. And it is taking itself more seriously, and we do have, as you said, this kind of more faded burgundy in sort of clothes and kind of in atmosphere version of Tom Baker, which, I mean, I understand is a sort of he suffered for his art in this, in that he was ill. And,
he's lost a lot of weight by this point, hasn't he? It's like sort of seeing some of the shots. Yeah.
But this somberness and this pain kind of do get something out of it from Tom Baker. And in a way that, I mean, his own sort of brooding kind of mortality and illness kind of he delivers something from, in contrast to his sort of up and down relationship with Lalla Ward, which seems to just get in the way sometime. I mean, you don't see it too much in this one, but you see it in the next one hugely. It's quite horrible, actually.
Yeah.
And it does make one feel a bit even for Matthew Waterhouse being kind of dropped into this kind of dysfunctional kind of relationship as a kind of surrogate son who neither of them want, and and you see that in a sense sort of on screen as well.
Well, that's almost the kind of the wrench of this season, isn't it? Because I find it very weird in a way, and this sort of is a long way around to a point I was sort of looking to make earlier when John was talking about the bureaucracy angle, but you start this season, it's Tom Baker, Lalla Ward and K9, and at the end it's Peter Davison, Tegan Adric and Nissa. And that's a sort of, it feels like quite a seismic jump to be making across one season, that the cozy family is being sort of shredded apart and put into this new, I mean, obviously the next set of characters, I mean, I think our ongoing frustration with them is that they all seem to hate each other, and that it almost feels like a level of dysfunction being brought on screen, whatever was going.
Yes.
But the thing I was going to say was that John mentioning the sort of bureaucratic inertia made me think of some things that almost feel like holdovers from the previous season. So presumably Andrew Smith, as a 17-year-old fan, has been sort of imbibing the Graham Williams era. And just as who's the character in Meglos, who's the sort of the accountant?
The accountant, yes. He doesn't get a name in Meglos.
No, who feels like a very Douglas Adams sort of holdover a year late. And I think here that idea that an entire society has grown up, and the mythology of a certain society and the belief that it's trapped in one place, that's grown up around a couple of pages missing from an instruction manual that's got taken as a sacred text. That's a really Douglas Adams idea.
Yes.
Yes. But feels like it's sort of it appears in a very different context to what we think Douglas Adams' Doctor Who is, which also makes me think that if it had been Douglas Adams writing and Christopher Bidmead script editing, he might have a few more hits to his name, Adams.
Well, there are some sort of nice parallels as well, in that, as in the Pirate Planet, you have a moment in this with the experiment on the Marsh Child, where you see Tom Baker deliver some really sort of high-grade moral indignation of the sort that he did when confronted with the captain's kind of sort of chamber of horrors of these shrunken planets in Pirate Planet. And there is a sort of it's a sort of a bit of a kind of thing that Robert Holmes would do as well, this kind of bureaucratic going on, and the cynicism of it as well. One of the deciders says at one point that it's for the good of the community that people believe these false things about the mists, that there is this idea that the elite are kind of entitled to lie in a good cause. And where I take it as being quite a serious, complex script is that they're not shown to be entirely wrong, in that it is probably a good idea to try and keep the Starliner people inside during the mistfall. It's postponing a traumatic moment for the society if they ever realise they're not going to be able to leave.
And in fact, when they do leave at the end, but with no real sense of where they're going, because they are leaving their home planet. They are now exiling themselves, effectively.
Absolutely. And you have this sort of futile tinkering around and then shooting off into who knows where very late. I mean, we'll come back to sort of European metaphors, but this is a bit of a Brexit metaphor. And I noticed from
We're finding them in everything
the info notes, even the scientist's original name was Lexeter. Which I would have had sort of uncanny echoes later, but they changed it because it was too similar to Lexa, the high priest in the previous one, Meglos. So you have this sort of this pursuit of kind of filling in time for its own sake.
So I guess at the end of it, it's not made entirely clear to the audience that Adric is the new companion. He sort of
No, you're left with some hope at the end that he has been left behind.
He does sort of disappear from the story, not to resurface. What
possessed them to cast him?
I mean, that's the thing. It's very easy to hate on Adric these
not having
days.
a go at Matthew Waterhouse. Absolutely not. It's not about him or even his performance, though he's not the best actor in the world, but he's not the only companion to be in that category.
You wouldn't have swapped him out for any of those other kids, would you?
No, absolutely not. No, absolutely.
Oh, Lewis gave a look to suggest he might disagree.
I don't. Yeah, no,
would Varsh have been the?
Well, he had a bit more spunk.
None of them were particularly well rounded, were they? I mean, the acting was sort of. Most of them were sort of adequate, I think, weren't they?
Sure, but no, not really. but no, but that's not really my point. The issue is what is Adric? What is that character? Forget the performance. Forget the pajamas. What is that character bringing to the party?
I think this is my theory about this, and sort of being a sort of fan of this generation. What I kind of saw it as was an attempt at an audience identification figure, but the problem was that the character was disastrously kind of not specified enough as to whether he's a sort of, this phrase, artful dodger kind of character, which in full circle he clearly isn't. He's a wannabe. He's an elite kid who still has kind of elite kind of attitudes. He's good at maths, and he makes sure all these sort of tough kids are well aware of how superior he is, but he still wants to sort of run around with them. He's a wannabe who is not fully accepted by them, or indeed he's not fully accepted in any environment he finds himself in, including the TARDIS. The only bit where he really fits in is where it's just him and Tom Baker's Doctor, where actually it can work quite well, I think, as the sort of apprentice to the aging Fourth Doctor. He never fits in anywhere. Now, run this through. It is actually quite an accurate picture of a certain sort of fan.
Yeah.
But it's not one that people want to look in the mirror and see. People want to identify with idealised versions of themselves.
Absolutely.
Without all the sort of gawkiness and nerdiness and self-consciousness and self-hatred that Adric brings to the table. You want a better version of yourself, not...
That's fascinating, actually.
No, that's
the uncomfortable truth, isn't it? Is what Adric provides.
No, I agree with you that he does, and I agree with you that doesn't necessarily make great television if you're wanting to cast it. But do you think that they were intelligently doing that? Because if they were, even though I think it's bad television, it's actually quite remarkable they've managed to nail it to that extent. Or do you think it's by mistake? And I suspect the latter.
Well, I mean, it's things usually are accidental and we read meaning into it afterwards. Yeah, sure. But I do remember, I mean, whether this is ex post because the decisions had been made to cast Matthew Waterhouse and it happened to be a script written by another very young man, Andrew Smith, that there was this idea that fandom was starting to kind of take over the controls of the programme almost at this stage, that you had...
Waterhouse famously sort of wanted to be... How old was he in this?
He was 18.
He was 18 and famously wanted to become an actor in the hope that one day he might play the Doctor. So he's...
Yeah. And he was young enough at this stage, and I always remember sort of reading a piece about him before his casting, that the thing that stuck in my mind about him, he was from Haywards Heath, which is a sort of... I won't say anything bad about Haywards Heath, but it's a commuter town in Sussex, and he was not so much older than me, and sort of reading about this, I sort of thought, what a lucky bastard you are, Waterhouse. And if one had but known, I mean, it seems I've not read his book, which is apparently quite a good memoir of his time. It was actually
the one where he describes himself in the third person throughout.
Yeah, but it's okay. I mean, he's a quirky guy.
Yeah.
But it's just
great ambassador for the show.
It's this horrible.
Do you know what? I will say, sorry, I've been sitting here snarking away in the corner.
No, I wasn't being snarky.
Me and Jim did go to a thing a couple of years ago that was an evening with Matthew Waterhouse in a pub upstairs in a pub in London, and he is a very quirky, eccentric guy. But he was incredibly engaging. He's matured well into sort of late middle age now. He was very engaging, just oddball actor with lots of quite strange stories to tell, and we had a thoroughly good evening.
Right.
So it's like
no, it's I mean my sort of conclude. It's a horrible example of never meet your heroes. It's sort of I feel for him really. I mean. And Adric was, even to me as a sort of younger than Matthew Waterhouse fan at the time, there was something cringy and awkward and horrible about watching Adric. And it's not, as you say, it's not really Matthew Waterhouse that's the cringy thing. It's Adric the character, the lines he gets, the inconsistency as to whether he's an idiot or a genius. And you can do you can do that. You can make somebody a genius in one department and gauche in another way. But it's done just so inconsistently and haphazardly throughout the character's time on Doctor Who that it's just horrible.
Poor Lala Ward doesn't have much to do, does she?
No. Around some face paint.
Although her zombieing her way around does remind me of a couple of points I wanted to raise about the marsh creatures. So... the poor marsh creature, after he's just been attacked by Dexeter, and it is an attack basically, but the thing, his destruction, his rampage in the lab reminded me very, very strongly of Arthur Fowler's Christmas Breakdown in EastEnders. If you were to play them side by side, I'm not sure you'd be able to tell which was which. I also assume that...
Well, that's the clip for this episode.
Totally.
Then, isn't it?
I do also think that I can only assume that they seem to make quite a few of the marsh people's kind of rubber suits, because there were quite a few of them. It looked like some money had gone up into it. But one can only assume that they were extremely difficult to get in and out of, because they all look like they've done something in their trousers, sort of hobbling along John
Notice
Wayne
a few
style.
Holes in a few of them as well.
They probably had to cut them to allow some of the feculent material to be released.
Some people have been really into that.
And then, well, yes, indeed. They can't wait for that Blu-ray of season 18 to hit the shelves. Or is that one out already?
It's out. This is what. So this was the first story I've watched off one of the classic series upscaled into Blu-ray.
Right.
And I mean,
so did you see some extra excrement?
I've got to say, it looked great. I mean, having been a massive skeptic for putting really old 4x3 standard definition shot on video telly onto Blu-ray as a way of cashing in. I thought, actually, this looks really good. But go on, carry on.
I'll make my last point. I did, however, I've got my favourite line from the serial. Patience, it's a virtue, they say. Still, I don't suppose that would appeal to stealers of river fruit. I rest my case.
There speaks a committed melon farmer.
John, what are we looking at next tonight?
So, fair to say, I think that this is a bit of a fan favourite, this one, from the 30th of April 2005, Dalek. Obviously the first season of New Who, so we got the Eccleston and Piper.
And who's the villain in Dalek?
So
it's good that some traditions are being upheld by giving the whole thing away in the title.
Well,
I was just annoyed it wasn't called Dalek of the Daleks or something. That's the.
Well, I mean, you joke, but the villain is surely Henry Van Staten.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, right, fine.
Sure, technically, Matthew.
Millard. It's a fair cop.
Yeah, so the TARDIS has picked up some kind of distress signal and lands in this deep cavern in Utah, is it?
Utah.
Yeah, because Salt Lake City is the nearest city, isn't it? And it turns out that it's a big sort of private collection of alien stuff, which is being put together by this guy who looks a lot like Jimmy Wales.
Yeah.
The Wikipedia founder is Jimmy Wales, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. Looks a lot like Jimmy Wales, the Wikipedia founder, though presumably with more money, because Jimmy Wales is always asking for money. So, although maybe that's how he gets rich. I don't know. I'm sure it all goes to the foundation before his lawyers start.
Keeps him in those nice kimonos.
But yeah, so this Henry Van Staten character, who's a sort of internet oligarch, plutocrat, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, that's a question I'd like to put a little asterisk against for later, but carry on.
Yeah, because it is quite forward-looking. It's quite ahead of its time in that, pointing out that these people are going to be a thing.
Yeah.
Given this was 2005. But yeah, so he's got this collection of alien stuff, and deep down in the vault there, he's also got a Dalek. A
Cyberman from Revenge of the Cybermen.
Well, there is, to be fair, there is a Cyberman. Yeah. But yes, he's got a Dalek. And it all seems a bit ill and not very awake, and they're torturing it and stuff. And the question is, will it wake up and cause havoc? And
spoilers. Yes.
Yes. Be dull if it hadn't.
Yeah.
Dull if it didn't. And something we get a lot of in this era of New Who, scores and scores and scores of soldiers shooting at it. Which is something of a trope in and because very new viewers might not have ever seen a Dalek before, so they have to reintroduce all of the tropes, but they play with them as well. So there's that wonderful scene where they slow down the bullets so you can see there's shielding and that they're impervious to that kind of attack, and it's, I don't know, I think it's well done. But yeah, I'm giving away I thought it was good, but just how good? Lewis.
I hadn't watched this since 2005, I think, and it is really good. I am used to a sort of the slower pace of classic Who, and
I'm getting used to it after all these years of doing I'll Explain Later. And
New Who always feels to me to be very fast, and Dalek certainly is very fast. We have got a long way into the plot in minute 2 of this story, and it is an exhilarating ride. I mean, this story works very well at that frequency, I think. It's a sort of bit of a microcosm type story almost. I don't like attempts to be epic. This is about one Dalek, and I think that sense of scale is really pleasing. That you've also got the huge upgrade in menace of the thing. The one Dalek is scarier than 10,000 Daleks. There aren't these sort of CGI generated armies sort of sweeping around as they will in a few years' time.
Few weeks' time.
Yeah, I think it's a satisfying piece in lots of ways because, as John says, it's reintroducing Daleks as a concept to people who will probably have some cultural association between Doctor Who and the Daleks. It would have been very remiss of the series not to do a Dalek story in its first new series.
This very nearly wasn't a Dalek story as well.
Really?
They lost the rights to the Daleks briefly during pre-production. So there's another script which went through a few drafts. The writer Rob Shearman did, where it's the villain is the. They got reused at the end of Series 3, where they're the little spheres, the orbs that are the future version of humanity.
Mm-hmm.
But it's
Toclophane?
Yes, the Toclophane, that's it. But it's interesting. I mean, you cannot imagine this working without the Daleks.
No, it's needed to sort of reconnect with the sort of... And I'm sure it's part of the reason why the thing took off into popular consciousness. You need the Daleks to do that. After all, it's what happened right at the origins of the thing, of the programme as a whole in 63, 64, that you have Daleks kind of take it somewhere new. You also have a lot of cultural baggage around Daleks. That stupid pepper pots, can't climb stairs, can't turn round, etc. Has a useless plunger kind of thing. And the programme systematically ridicules and subverts all these kind of cliches about how rubbish Daleks are. It just restores
what are you going to do? Sucker me to death scene is amazing.
Yes. Yeah. Fantastic.
And within a quarter of a second, there's no beat between it.
It's so fast. It's brilliant.
Right there.
So no, I think
which is also quite funny. Which
it is.
Which I like.
Really funny. Yeah.
Yes. I think it's marvelous. It does. Because sometimes you can see stories that are in the mix to achieve something functionally for the good of the programme as a whole, to sort of take the narrative on, to lose a companion, gain a companion, whatever. Those stories are often a bit rubbish. Whereas this one, in Restoring the Daleks, does it so well. I'm take my hat off to everyone involved in it, because it tells a great story. It reintroduces Daleks. Yes, okay, it's the last of the Daleks, but nobody seriously believes that.
No.
That's a promise that the series cheerfully makes, and it knows it's never going to keep.
Makes every time they turn up, pretty much, doesn't it?
Yeah. And it has a little sort of nod to the last story that was supposed to be the last ever Dalek story, which was the evil of the Daleks and the human factor and so on. It's a kind of remake of that in some ways, which was also supposed to be the final outing for the Daleks. So there's a little bit of a nod and a wink that this is, they're back.
Yeah, I agree. I was trying to think of this is an episode that mechanically has to do something I know what you were saying aside about the not being wincing slightly when they tried to go too epic, and I think the final two-parter does go epic. But for that to have any chance of working, you need to have some skin in the game, and that's what this episode is getting you to. And so it has a job to do. And you're right that often those can be quite, it's like having to do your homework. It's not very pleasant, but you have to do it.
We'll do this for the enjoyable payoff when you see millions of them at the end of the season.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I was trying to think of other episodes of Doctor Who that succeed in at a point where they need to do a thing, but also are very successful. The only one I can really think of off the top of my head maybe is The Rescue, which I think is phenomenal.
Yeah.
And it's basically there just to introduce Vicky, right? But it's an amazing story. This, I think, is... I think that's really top tier. I think this is really top tier too. It does all those things, but it reminded me, actually... we'll have to talk about Christopher Eccleston's performance, because he's phenomenal in this.
Yeah.
But when the scene, at the first scene where he encounters the Dalek in the chamber, and they're discussing the Time War and the fact that they're both the last of their kind and so on, it did make me think how, even though it's inevitable at some point, given the new mythology that the show has laid, that we would see the Time War, and we did end up seeing the Time War repeatedly. It seemed like how fascinating and how effective it was of Russell T Davies to hold from seeing it for at least until the very, very end of his tenure. When I think about the way it's seeded here, so terrifying you dare not see it. And he seeds that in later.
And what a great dramatic engine that is, really sort of throbbing at the heart of what this whole series is doing.
And he does it later with, I think when they talk about the could have been king and the nightmare child and all that sort of stuff. These things that you don't see.
Too horrible to imagine.
Exactly. And Eccleston is such a good actor that you don't want to see any of those things because you can see what it's done to him.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is magnificent. I mean, I've felt for a long time that, I'm in a two-horse race really as to what my favourite / what I think the best Doctor Who story is, and it ever of any era. For me, it's between this and Spearhead from Space, and depending on which way the wind's blowing, I sort of vary. I think this is such an exceptional piece of work. I've seen this quite a few times since 2005. I've probably not seen it for a couple of years, but watching it again this morning, I was just blown away all over again just by how accomplished it is. I think it does all of the things, as Lewis was saying, it reintroduces the Daleks. The Eccleston series is, I think, very coy in terms of it's very careful, I think, about what it uses from the mythology of Doctor Who. We don't get a mention of Gallifrey until a couple of years later. Doesn't introduce regeneration or anything until you need it at the end of the season. So everything is sort of very carefully thought through in terms of like, what are we going to use? The Daleks feel like an inevitability. It's basically people remember the Doctor, the TARDIS, and the Daleks, and that's just about it. So it has heft bringing back the Daleks. It knows that the public know what the importance of the Daleks is, and I mean, I think for me it's just how all of that plays together in terms of just creating this very, very complete piece that is reliant on it wouldn't have worked with any other alien. It's reliant on that iconography and you knowing what it means for the public for the Daleks to be there and for the Doctor to be there, but then also, as you say, the incredibly stripped back scale of it to take this most famous villain from Doctor Who and to tell a story about two survivors of a devastating conflict working out what happens next, essentially, and that's what's incredible. I mean, that scene in the chamber where the Doctor meets the Dalek for the first time. I understand that when Russell T Davies was doing interviews in the run-up to the series while they were still making it, that was a scene that he had on his laptop that he would show journalists to sort of show what this is now. And it's the two of them, just completely going toe to toe and knowing how to push each other's buttons, because they've lived that conflict, they've been locked in it, and the two of them have lost everything, and they're sort of there, both of them, these kind of redundant elements in the universe now that conflict's gone away, but still not sure how to confront each other's existence. And the way the pendulum swings just in that scene alone, with the two of them kind of gaining the upper hand over each other, is magnificent. I'm sure we'll talk a bit more about Eccleston, but I want to throw. I mean, obviously, Eccleston is the standout performance of this. You've got to doff your
Bruno
hat to
Langley. As Adam.
Is Bruno Langley still at Her Majesty's pleasure, or is that?
Was he put in? Is he in the Slammer?
Yeah. Well, he was certainly convicted of sexual assault a couple of years ago.
Oh wow!
So maybe let's not linger on that.
He pleaded guilty on 28th of November 2017.
Well, there you go.
Let's not go any further into that.
Absolutely
he obviously
not.
Did, but
you can let that happen on your own terms. Good. Well, way to puncture the fact that I wanted to doff my hat to Nicholas Briggs.
Yeah, magnificent.
Now, Nicholas Briggs is someone who it's actually sort of tallies a little bit with what we were saying during Full Circle. Is someone who's had a long association on the fan side of Doctor Who. He is another fan who won the golden ticket. Effectively, in the 80s, he was making his own audio adventures where he was playing the Doctor and writing the stories and doing all the music himself. And here he is getting to play with the, getting to actually
the
do
train
it for real.
set,
getting to play with the train set, the actual train set. But what a knockout performance! The way he's able to emote, and the bit that the Dalek is such a fascinating creature in this, in the way. The Dalek is manipulative, it's threatening, but also how it does tug on your heartstrings. I mean, the bit where, and you've sort of got the sense that the Dalek's taking Rose for a bit of a ride before she puts her hands on it, but it's very convincing, even though, you know, it's a Dalek saying, like, they torture me, all I do is will for death. Like, you sort of buy it, and that's entirely because of Briggs's performance.
But I think that's something that's weirdly human in the sense that, and it actually tallies with, and I wasn't sold on the whole of the two-parter, but in fact, I've got major problems with it. But in was it The Witch's Familiar?
Yes.
And the other one.
Yeah, the Davros two-parter.
Yeah, the Davros two-parter, Capaldi. When they're having the conversations, and actually it's all part of Davros's plan, spoilers, but he's, you know, discussing... It's a similar conversation, actually.
Yes.
They're both discussing their place as kind of redundant forces in the universe, or trying to work out where they are. Obviously, there's a bit, you know, they're psychologically both a bit more... It's like an echo of this conversation, but with them both having achieved a bit more acceptance, weirdly. Yeah. But it's a very human thing, isn't it, to have more than one motivation at once. So, yes, the Dalek is being manipulative and trying to get a rise, or trying to work out some way of gaming this situation, that he's got this naive person in front of him who he suspects for some reason has. But at the same time, what he's saying is also true.
Yeah.
Yes.
And
yes.
so it's quite... It's possible to imagine that both motivations are there at the same time,
and the fact also that, I mean, even just the very fact that the Dalek knows how to emotionally game this, how to play on Rose's sympathy, which is not something that I think many writers have really done with the Daleks much in the past. It's sort of incredible. And then, you know, I mean, I also take it at face value at the end that the Dalek just wants to see the sunlight and then die or something. It's like, and then when you sum it up like that, it seems a bit glib, but it's like I was welling up at the end. I think it's incredible.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think you hit the nail on the head. Its ability to manipulate and wheedle is just wonderful, and it's a bit Hannibal Lecter almost, that you've got this thing locked up in a vault, and it comes and talks and sort of and Rose is there as a sort of Clarice Starling figure who kind of touches it and gets too close to it, and she's not changed by it in this version of this telling of the story, but it is changed by it. And there's quite a lot of the museum has quite a lot of that sort of vaulty kind of thing of the prison in the Hannibal Lecter films, and this sort of intelligence and manipulativeness of the Dalek, and that's before it kind of even gets the upgrades that it gets via kind of downloading the internet and regenerating itself through Rose's sort of magic power.
Yes, whatever that is that needs to get the story along. But then, of course, yes, when it becomes the exterminating Dalek, you know, that we know it is the most badass exterminating Dalek. I mean, sort of weirdly, I mean, obviously, like, we won't do the fanish quibble that obviously we've seen Daleks fly before. I mean, it works with the assumption that the general public won't be remembrance of the Daleks, and that will come as a nice surprise. Weirdly, the bit that struck me this time is when the Dalek's midsection swivels round and it can fire behind it while scouting a different direction with the eye stalk, which
still looks
really
good.
Impressed me. It looks good. Really good. Yeah.
I mean, the visual effects stuff throughout is amazing. I mean, that model of the Dalek mutant,
yes,
the end,
it's lovely
with one glistening, slightly glassy eye.
Yeah,
and the fact that it manages to sort of breathe and pulsate with the voice and emote, given that it's basically just a rubber blob. It's just incredible work.
Yeah, if you got that design slightly wrong, it would look really stupid, that end scene, and yet it doesn't. It's
no, I mean, that, really, and they really, you know, they're aware. I mean, the director of this was Joe Ahern. You know, they've got the confidence, because that work is right, to really do that close-up on it.
Well, there's a lot. I mean, that's a sort of bit of a Joe Ahern trademark, actually, is the really extreme close-ups, which I think you don't actually see many other directors in. I mean, Joe Ahern directed quite a lot of the Eccleston episodes and hasn't come back and worked since, but apparently they really hit it off, Eccleston and Ahern.
He roped in to do more episodes than he was originally scheduled to do, or something.
Yeah. He came back to do the later ones, I think, at quite short notice. But there's super extreme close-ups of sort of the Doctor's eyes and face. Like, I mean, he fills the screen. But also, what I made a note of this time round was the way he shoots the Dalek, especially in those scenes where, it's there's a couple of other people talking to the Dalek, and the eye stalk's spinning round, and the camera's trained right in on the blue eye stalk, and then sort of pulses round as this thing is swiveling its head around, and it looks magnificent. I mean, he directs the Dalek stuff incredible, and gives the Dalek. It's another thing that helps give the Dalek such a sense of presence and character and threat. It's unsettling. Just being in the room with this thing is unsettling because you don't know what it's going to do next. And
its efficiency, it reminds me very much of the Terminator, in that sense of it absolutely will not stop, and it'll take the shortest route from A to B, and setting off the sprinklers that it can electrocute.
Brilliantly nasty.
Yeah. It's just that's the quickest thing to do, and the sprinkler. All the water splashing on the Dalek. There's something, I don't know, there's something weirdly sinister about that as well, quite noirish. It's very nicely shot. So good are the good things in this that I forget or am allowed and completely dismiss the things that really don't work, like Langley's performance.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of
Corey Johnson chews the furniture a bit.
I was going to say, a lot of the guest cast aren't great, really.
No. But I don't care. I really don't care. Something else, I just want to get across how clever I think it is that the tightrope this is walking is really, that this is live ammo that it's playing with. You've only just introduced this hero character that's got to sustain this grand investment and this risk that the BBC have taken. And here they have him in the first 10 minutes of it torturing somebody. And, he tortures the Dalek. The Doctor does, he wants to kill it, but
and then by the end, his excitement when he finds that massive
lock
gun,
and load,
and he says lock and load, which is obviously not, and it's not a sort of, you would sort of worry that this is somehow an accidental perversion of the Doctor's character, but no, I mean here it makes perfect sense that the Dalek is the one thing that can get under his psyche so much that he becomes a monster. And so then at that point where Rose calls him out on it at the end and the penny suddenly drops how far from his values he's strayed, it's devastating.
But the other thing is that we have seen when it's done badly, because if you go to the Sixth Doctor, sort of casually tossing someone into an acid bath and saying, "Mind if I don't join you?" and which we only reviewed recently, and
last month.
Yeah,
seems a lot longer, doesn't it?
I know, right? and again, in Trial of a Time Lord, when he is presenting the Vervoid episode as him doing something good, and it gets turned around. Well, actually, you're guilty of genocide, or we are going to prosecute for genocide, and you don't get the sense that the Doctor is. I mean, you do, but you don't. Colin Baker and that era and those writers and that production team doesn't really sell the idea at that point that Colin Baker wouldn't. He more or less is just doing some pesticide work around the garden. It's not. They're irritating and he killed them. This Doctor is torn apart by the decisions he's had to make, and it has left him damaged. And it does mean that he's saying these violent things, but you can see that that's not who he is. It's what he's become. Yeah. And it's interesting because would you really do differently from what the Doctor decides to do? And but the difference is the Doctor feels guilty about it. Even though he's actually objectively done the right thing throughout, he feels guilty about it, and that's what makes him a better person. That's what makes him a hero. And I find that fascinating. You know, when he describes the Dalek as racial superior and its concept of racial superiority, it will go to Salt Lake City and it will kill every one of those million people because it thinks it's better than them and they're different and they shouldn't therefore be alive. When he talks about, he's absolutely right, and you can find people who on the extremes of politics, you can find people who think like that today. I'm reminded of, I think I've talked about it before on this show, but Karl Popper's paradox of tolerance. Where if you tolerate people who would not tolerate you, eventually tolerance will become fatally undermined. So I think the Doctor is right, and I think it's he's taking decisions that he regrets, but it's that he regrets them and still
when you
is
see
pained
the
by the fact
cost that it brings to him.
That's what makes him and this performance and this writing. In the wrong hands, this would have gone so desperately wrong.
It's also worth remembering that this is an adaptation of a Big Finish story that starred Colin Baker.
Yeah,
which, have any
Jubilee.
of us listened to Jubilee, or is that?
I haven't.
No? Okay,
No,
fine.
no.
I mean, Rob Shearman never came back to write for more Doctor Who. I don't know if this was. I don't know because obviously he wrote quite a lot of Big Finish, and he's continues to write lots of Radio 4 plays. And things,
I'm not in a position to comment as to whether Shearman, whether he's the one who's brought all this good stuff to the party. Certainly, he deserves some of the plaudits because this won awards and deservedly so, and a lot of great work is there. So clearly, he takes some credit for it. But a lot of the dialogue has a kind of RTD flourish to it. Right at the very beginning, and it lands with a bang, as Lewis said. But if this is a thing about if this is a collection of alien stuff, this makes you Exhibit A.
Yeah,
it's just all that
lovely,
kind of zinger stuff, and that kind of you just
Although Adric says something very similar in Castrovalva, I have to say, just to lower the tone.
Well,
I can't believe you dropped the C word there. So, who do we think? Something I was thinking about this morning. I mean, yeah, in a way, this is sort of quite ahead of the curve in terms of predicting that some of the sort of bad actor kind of power players in modern society would be the people who have a lot of control over the flow of information on the internet.
We saw this in the season 4 two-parter with the Sontarans as well, didn't we?
Yes, which feels like it sort of updated the thinking a little bit further in terms of really starting to nail that kind of Zuckerberg-esque. And that was the thing in, like, from a 2005 perspective, who is Van Statten meant to be? There's a sort of implication that I don't know if he's a sort of Bill Gatesy type. I mean, what's he's a person who seems to be enough of a power broker to be able to replace a president because he doesn't
I think it's.
It doesn't really matter. It's a side thing for the story.
Don't forget that this story is set in very neatly in 2012, so it's meant to be that sort of just arm's length away. I think genuinely, whether this is Shearman or RTD or a beautiful synthesis of the two, this is genuinely prescient.
Yeah.
I mean, there's an episode in the first season of The West Wing when they're choosing a Supreme Court justice. And there's a famous bit where Sam Seaborn, played by Rob Lowe, says, the next decade is going to be about civil liberties and who's gay and who's not and who gets to know about it and information. And that was 1999. So, you can there's some decent. There are prophetic dramatists out there who can see which way the wind is blowing, and I think that clearly, with Rob Shearman's help, no doubt, but Russell T Davies is clearly one of them. This is a theme that comes back in that Sontaran two-part. It comes back actually in the season 2 Cyberman two-parter as well.
Oh yes.
So I think that this is something that I just think he knows which way the wind is blowing, RTD.
Yeah, that's interesting. Interesting. Also, you mentioned the season 2 Cyberman two-parter. I mean, well, yeah.
No, but it's there. I mean, that stuff is there, though, right?
No, absolutely. But I was also sort of thinking that how much nicer that Cyberman head that we see at the beginning of this looks.
That's awesome, yeah.
Than the series. I mean, it looks great. And that's
yeah.
another beautiful bit of direction from Joe Ahern, that when the Doctor's staring into that glass cabinet and you see the reflection lines up perfectly, so the reflection back looks like the Doctor's got the sort of Cyberman handlebars kind of around his head. It's beautifully
it's
done.
lovely.
But yeah, that's a revenge era Cyberman,
It is, apparently,
isn't it?
yes.
Which were never one of the favourites from the classic era, but looks awesome in this context. Yeah.
No, it's interesting. I mean, I think Bill Gates was the only kind of tech titan of those times. So yes, I think it is sort of prescient that you have a sort of single kind of, obviously from the get-go, utterly malevolent and psychotic character running it all. But he's a sort of figure from the future, but he's also linking up with sort of 90s conspiracy culture almost.
Yeah,
there's a sense in which this sort of museum of alien artifacts it's
Very X-Files.
It is, yes.
Yeah.
The Doctor and the Daleks have kind of invaded an X-Files episode, and it speaks to some of those things, and it's a link between sort of 90s conspiracy culture and its rather nastier kind of version now.
I was thinking in a way that the fact that he, in that opening scene, his power is talked about through the prism of how we're going to change the US president. It's much more a parody of Murdoch, right?
Yeah.
Right.
But it's just that sense
which
of...
we get explicitly in the next episode with Simon
Right.
Pegg, isn't it? Yeah.
But it's just that Murdochs of the future, in our near future, in our foreseeable future with the technology, they'll be tech people.
Doctor, look!
Oh dear.
Must have got through the tunnel.
Perhaps it knew we were here.
What?
I don't know. I sensed something before. It's stronger this time.
Doctor, it's getting closer. Can't you switch that barrier thing off? I'm trapped.
I'll make your way over here. Perhaps you can deactivate it.
I can't.
I'll tell you what to do. Come on, Brett. You can make it.
I can hardly move.
You've got to. It's catching up.
I can't, Doctor.
What do you want? No, I won't. I won't.
Doctor? Doctor, what are you talking about?
It wants to absorb us, Cred. Make us part of it.
I can't move. It's gone.
Are you going to say something daft like, of course, this being 11 and a half years before I was born, it's very dear to my heart. So, Matt, what was it, the one you said about that? You said that it came out when you were born, so obviously...
It was Mordrin Undead when my mum was... When I was... Yeah.
She was 8 months pregnant with you, and so clearly it was very dear to your heart.
Yeah. I can't really make a similar claim for this. So we're talking about The Curse of Peladon, which is from Season 9 of classic Doctor Who. This is January to February 1972. It is at this point, relatively rare trip into outer space for the Doctor and Jo.
Well, they reference that this is the first time he's fixed the TARDIS, right? So this is, I think he's done missions for the Time Lords, but...
And it sort of becomes apparent at the end of this was another one that they probably didn't really know about, a mission that they're on.
Yeah.
But we basically have the Doctor and Jo land on the planet Peladon, and Peladon is going through a rather crucial transition in its existence. It is seeking to join the Galactic Federation, and a number of delegates from the Galactic Federation have pitched up in order to assess the application and decide whether to grant them membership. But Peladon is how would you describe Peladon? It's somewhat sort of feudal society.
Yeah, medieval and feudal. I mean,
deep level of superstition,
but with a lot of resources, apparently.
Yes, which is quite a common trope in classic Doctor Who. Anyway, not all of the Peladon top brass are keen on the idea of joining the Galactic Federation for fear of what it might do to Peladon's sovereignty going forward, and various skullduggery in order to try and sabotage the application and conference ensue. The Doctor is mistaken for the Earth delegate from the Federation, and Jo masquerades as a Earth princess. We have, I think possibly because of the times in which we are recording this, seen quite a lot of BREXIT parallels in a few Doctor Who stories.
I feel it'd be appropriate
recently.
to bring Lewis in here and just say, was there anything going on at the time?
Oh no, sorry, that's a much better joke.
Was there anything going on at the time that there might have been?
There were.
You see where I'm going with the question?
There were one or two developments it may have echoed. Yes, I mean it's one of sort of comparatively few stories that have a really direct reference to contemporary issues. It would have been written in 1971 when Britain was signing up to the Treaty of Rome, and it would have been transmitted while there were parliamentary debates about joining the European communities, as it then was. So these ideas that
it's a live issue.
Yeah, I mean, all these sorts of quite a lot of some of the dialogue even is kind of lifted from the sort of things people were saying in these debates at the time. So it was a very live issue, and it's to the credit of the current showrunners that we haven't had to return to Peladon during our current difficulties so far.
Well, I mean, this is something I was actually kind of thinking about, weirdly, that, I mean, obviously we are now watching The Curse of Peladon almost at the other end of that process as we extract ourselves from that situation. And it comes sort of with the same health warning that when we talked about Vengeance on Varos last month. We're recording this a couple of months ahead of it going out, so we could well get overtaken by events on some of the specifics of how Brexit is going to pan out or not. But yeah, I mean, it is fascinating that the language that's being used feels so sort of resonant with what still is like a live issue, and that there's still the same debates being had. I'm surprised no one used the term vassal state anywhere to describe what Peladon's going to become.
And I think this is something that's both important in using this almost as a kind of historical marker of what the debate was like in 1972, and a reminder. So many people, especially boomers in their 60s, 70s, say things in the current Brexit debate along the lines of, we just thought we were joining a trading community.
We were never told.
We were never told about this. This proves, I think, and actually, as does much of the contemporary debate, if you watch sort of panel question time style programmes at the time, or read any of the stuff that was being debated in Parliament, it's complete hogwash. People knew exactly what this was. This was a political union as well as a trading union, and anyone who doesn't think
come
that
with
debate,
sovereignty trade-offs, and that was all on the table.
All of those things were absolutely clear and debated at the time, and it's become it's really odd, actually. I mean, you know much more about it than I do, but it's really odd that this has become a kind of accepted thing that people thought they were signing up for this and something different. That wasn't the case at all.
No. I did an article about the language of the 1975 referendum campaign on sovereignty, and it's very clear that this was discussed at the time. And the campaign to get out of the European community in 1975 was sovereignty was one of their main themes. It's just that nobody was buying the argument then. And you can see these arguments deployed in Peladon as well. I mean, there is sort of one point where Hepesh, who's the high priest of Peladon and the chief kind of anti-federation politician in Peladon,
shall we say?
He's a skeptic.
He talks a lot of Hepesh, if you'll ask me.
Part of the Federation Research Group.
Yes, exactly. Yes. He says at one point, "I would rather be a cave dweller and free."
Yeah,
and it's all about sovereignty as opposed to economics.
Well, thanks for your call, Hepesh.
And the Doctor sort of. Is it the Doctor or is it the King who sort of answers at that point? Well, people are enslaved by ritual and superstition. And so,
pretty sure I think that's the Doctor, but
I think it was the Doctor. My memory is I wrote down the line because it was an interesting sort of counterpoint between these two perspectives that you see. And I think one of the nice things, one of the favours that Curse of Peladon does for its audience is it's clear whose side. It's clear where the Doctor's heart is in this. It's clear where the author's heart is. He's pro-European propaganda in a large degree, and nothing wrong with that, say I. But the antis are actually given a fair shake in terms of their arguments.
Yes.
Their arguments are not stupid ones. They're not sort of travesties. They're things that people might actually argue in these sorts of debates. Hepesh, the high priest, does speak about the kind of traditions, and he also warns, which ironically turns out to be true, that joining the Federation would mean that their mineral resources get ripped off, which is probably all you need to ever engage with about the sequel to this, The Monster of Peladon. And he's kind of right about this. And he's given it's quite interesting to me that he is treated with a degree of sympathy by the script and by the production. He behaves in a completely dishonourable way. He abuses this native animal because of its sort of heraldic and mythical qualities.
This is Agador. We're talking
Agador,
about.
yes.
Push pineapple, shake the tree.
Grand beast, this sort of beast of the sort of heroic beast of the myths of this planet. And he finds a live one and sort of more or less abuses it like a Russian sort of dancing bear to...
So they're the proletariat in this
Yeah, well, I guess you could. Yeah, I think the class analogies come out in a sort of cruder way in the sequel. But yeah, I mean, you've got this.
I'm joshing. I think this is great.
You've got this sort of use of these symbols. He actually deliberately sets up the Doctor to get killed at one point by offering his sort of safe passage and then asking that the Doctor be killed, which is in most cultures of any sort of primitive nature is one of the real taboos. You are a swine if you do that, and yet he is treated with a degree of dignity despite doing all these awful things. His campaign is a tissue of lies and misrepresentation and dishonour, but his cause is treated with a certain amount of respect.
I'd also further that slightly and say that it also does put a degree of scrutiny. I mean, it's left fairly vague as to actually what the Galactic Federation is, how big it is, who else is involved. But it does put a degree of scrutiny on the delegates. And they're highly amusing in all sorts of ways, which we'll come to. But they are a quite well thought out group of characters. So you've got Arcturus, who... spoilers, turns out to be one of the key traitors involved in this, that he's a delegate, but also he's looking to do his own side deal, and essentially is quite happy to shaft the Federation if need be. You've got the Ice Warriors, who are in this, honest actors, and they are.
And that nicely wrong foots you, because you haven't seen them in that way in the series
but
before.
they also are, which you can sort of imagine in the sort of interplanetary political state, also struggling to present themselves as honest actors because of their previous infractions, which is sort of terribly interesting. And then you've got Alpha Centauri, who is this kind of shrieky, panicky technocrat who is, continually worrying about precedent and all of these kind of things. But they are, in their own way, not... Although the script is unambiguous that I think that joining the Federation would be a good thing for Peladon, it's not uncritical of those characters and their foibles. And I think sometimes the language they use, like I think it's Alpha Centauri that at one point says, "We're here to save you from barbarism," or something, which is not, that you can imagine that as sort of quite a high-handed, quite unhelpful thing to say. So it's not...
It's like when some hashtag FBPE type starts sort of shitting on the I don't know,
great unwashed,
the great unwashed in some northern town that hasn't.
That's exactly it.
Yeah, it feels like there's that elite distance between.
Can't you see that I'm here to help you, you stupid bastard? Kind of thing. It's like, well, I don't really want your help.
Which kind of might be true at the same time as a completely unhelpful framing of a.
It's no way to win a debate.
It's no way to win a debate, and so on.
And it's certainly the attitude that the delegates bring to Peladon. Really, they are...
We're doing you a favour.
Yeah, they're scathing about this sort of medieval planet.
But equally, they'll hide behind the strictures of the organisation in order to, if they feel the risk is too high. When Arcturus, obviously, he turns out to be... My note for the reveal that he's a baddie when you see him listening into the conversation.
Which is really
My note is, fuck, Arcturus is a wrong-un. And we will get to his whole the way I just wow. But the way when you're saying the way you're saying we can't get involved in this and references like paragraph 12 subsection 4 or whatever it is. I agree completely. It does. It absolutely puts us firmly in the camp that Peladon should join this federation. But it's, as you say, not at all uncritical. It is critical of that organisation, and it shows the limitations of it.
And also,
but that makes it feel very real, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. It makes it real. There is sort of politics going on within the Federation ones. It's never exactly clear to me to what extent the Arcturus delegate is freelancing or whether he's representing his government, because they've got a big problem if he's representing their official government and trying to do a side deal and sell out the rest of the Federation. And I thought it was quite... Whether I'm reading too much into this, and this is something I do, I read too much into things. But you can sort of...
Podcast is for.
You can sort of see you can see some sort of national kind of characteristics and stereotypes. Like, I think the Ice Warriors are clearly the Germans in the EU. The warriors,
the former belligerent. Yes,
they've turned over a new leaf, but the Doctor's still racist about them in really quite a scandalous way. Alpha Centauri,
savage and warlike.
Alpha Centauri is a sort of. He's a sort of she, it is a kind of French caricature.
Yeah.
The sort of aesthetic kind of life kind of taken to, and which left me thinking sort of what's Arcturus, and I came to the conclusion he's Dutch because he lives in a kind of bong kind of arrangement with his bubbling tank.
It's tough, isn't it? I think you're spot on with the Ice Warriors being the Germans. That's you're not overreaching with that. Alpha Centauri is French. Oh no! Oh, should I say dire? Oh la la. Yeah, I can see that too. It's tough, isn't it, with Arcturus? It's not clear. I don't know who was seen as the. I don't know.
No.
Yeah.
I suppose the other thing is that it shows, and the thing that I found interesting about the dynamic with the Federation is also that is an organisation that seems to have some kind of fragility to it as well. It's that how quickly, I think, and Arcturus is the obvious example of this, and again, it's not clear whether he's gone rogue or whether, you know, they've got a sort of bigger problem with the planet of Arcturus, but the extent to which I think all of the delegates instinctively want to protect their own interests when the shit starts to hit the fan, and it's like their sort of lives are threatened by this, and despite the fact that they are representing, you know, supposedly this body that's meant to be bigger than any one individual planet, it comes pretty close to all falling apart because they are looking to sort of save their own necks in this situation. Which again, I thought was an interesting,
and
this process of accepting this country, this planet that has mixed views about it, almost brings apart the project, doesn't it?
Yeah. Well, and again, I'm maybe reaching here, but we're not given a proper reason why the Doctor has to be there. We assume it's some sort of piece of Time Lord chicanery to get him there.
Well, that's what he assumes at the end, yeah.
And I suppose he brings a sort of rather disinterested view. I mean, from what we see of the Earth delegate when she turns up, she's kind of a bit sort of
you wonder if it would have gone somewhere,
would have gone all sort of horribly wrong if she'd been there rather than the Doctor. And it plays to John Pertwee's strengths, this whole thing. I mean, reasonable
mediator,
kind of all this sort of diplomacy and sort of managing people and getting on.
Well, as Joe says, you love all that chairman delegate stuff.
Yes, he does. I mean, he's having a great time.
To which he replies, "How do you like being a princess?" Princess.
Touché. Yes.
They absolutely sizzle in this.
So
yeah. I'd forgotten by episode 4 that he wasn't actually an official delegate to it.
It's quite a nice little shift at the end when the actual delegate turns up and you go, oh yeah, this whole thing has been, and whatever situation the Doctor's brokered,
yes,
could well unravel now because it's turned out that there's been a massive betrayal of trust.
So I suppose listeners to this podcast will be familiar enough with my feeling that there's often this debate.
We haven't actually said we all liked this, didn't we?
Oh, yeah.
This is really good.
Yeah, amazing.
Fine. Okay, just checking.
Top draw. But my feeling that Pertwee, people often ask, is he a high Tory or a kind of a Labour figure? I feel very strongly that he's a kind of physical manifestation of the post-war consensus. It's funny, isn't it, that when he introduces Jo as a princess, more or less off the top of his head to deal with a situation of protocol.
She rolls with that brilliantly as well.
She up and runs
absolutely.
Yeah,
she's really sassy. I mean, right down to
super resourceful.
Right down to adopting a haughtier manner and then dissing the pilot of their ship.
Yeah.
to which the Doctor looks fuming.
Yeah.
It's really funny. Katie Manning is excellent.
She's wonderful.
Yes.
But when there's that question about from the Ice Warrior about the position of royalty on Earth, are you like us? You've kept with the old way of doing royalty. The Third Doctor replies, "Yes, in a democratic sort of way." And it's a simple little line that somehow outlines this Doctor's feeling of, it's that thing of embodying that post-war compromise, the necessity of compromise, the necessity of consensus, progressive, evolutionary change, rather than something overwhelming, and that allows him to be an excellent broker in this situation, because he can see both sides' point of view, even though he also, like the king, has a clear direction he wants to go in. He's able to be skillful and nuanced enough to take people with him and forge a consensus. And so I feel again that he's really emblematic of an era here.
I agree. I think he is.
Well, that's handy.
He is this kind of consensus figure. One of his skills is using the machinery that exists of governmental structures like this, of sort of working his way into unit as a sort of private kind of research lab to try and get the TARDIS working again. I mean, he navigates these things incredibly well. He has this ability to bring people together. He's not about that sort of monarchy in a democratic sort of way, and you see that also in Inferno as well, his sort of regard for the royal family, but the idea of using these traditional institutions in a sort of democratic, consensual, egalitarian sort of way,
to embed that change and take people with it,
and absolutely this is his politics. I've never seen the argument that maybe by the standards of the early 70s, he might be a sort of Heath-type Tory, conceivably, or he might be a Wilson-type Labour person. I don't see anything profoundly Tory in him. I mean, there's a line in, I can't remember which one it was, about sort of the wrong sort of people getting into the club and so on.
Oh, yes.
And that is something which people seem to have picked at and picked over and reinterpreted in all sorts of different ways. And it could be sincere, or it could just be bluster. And what we see in Curse of Peladon is he's brilliant at the bluster. And so to me, the sort of it contextualizes that a bit, that he can operate in these social environments.
Well, who's the champion, the one who can't speak?
Grun.
Yeah, I thought it was very, he's been in a battle. The chaps tried to kill him more than once.
Yes.
And he's extremely, he doesn't hold a grudge about that. And
kill him and his stunt double.
But, he really, he accepts him at the end. And
there's a sort of chivalry and dignity about
decency,
him.
yes.
Yeah.
Noblesse oblige.
Oh, yes. I mean, as well as being a sort of consensus Butsker-like kind of figure, he's also, I think, he shares a lot of things. He's Jeremy Thorpe without the rent boy problem.
Right.
He's got this sort of aristocratic,
would have been a bit challenging.
Aristocratic bearing and sort of snappy dress sense as well. I mean, I realise it's a theme on this podcast, quite how well dressed John Pertwee
nice
is.
Threads.
Really
Jeremy Thorpe was as well, and a very sort of the ability to turn on the bombast and bluster and bullshit for a good cause, or just to get out of a scrape. I mean, Thorpe
good
had
Doctor Who
this.
connection as well, with Russell T Davies having just recently written Very English Scandal.
Absolutely, yeah.
Which
and
is available on your streamers and that, I think.
Yeah. Yes, I mean, a fine piece of work, and does reveal quite what a sort of commanding presence Thorpe had. We tend to know about him now because of sort of the unfortunateness of shot dogs and so on. But he did have this really charismatic kind of
what
projection.
About, instead of France, Alpha Centauri as Thorpe, maybe? No. moving
behind the shower
curtain,
yes.
But it's not just that thematic meat and the weighty sort of contemporary. I say contemporary meaning at the time and now. Stuff that resonates, and we should give a hat tip to the writer Brian Hales, but I suppose as well the script editor Terence Dix, producer Barry Letts. It's that dream team again where you feel that so many different political perspectives somehow manage to coalesce to give us a view of the era that's actually quite
nuanced,
fair and balanced, to coin a phrase. Just from a production point of view, and in terms of the script, the dialogue that's there, we talked already about some of the interactions between Joe and the Doctor. They as a team are just fabulous and sizzle. But some of the direction, and this was directed by Lenny Mayne, who's not a name I remember, but there's a fabulous bit. I mean, first of all, the Gothic cliffside castle, all that
the
rain,
model work at the
Oh, it's
opening is
magnificent.
Oh, isn't it?
Yeah.
and them sort of standing on the castle, on the cliff edge.
Oh yeah,
the
all that
TARDIS,
cliff edge.
That's really
like,
good.
That
Nice
cliff
cliff
is
edge,
really,
yeah.
it's good, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's well done. And when Joe is doing that sort of shuffle along the windowsill outside, there's a genuine sense of slight peril about it that she's.
Vertigo, yeah.
Yeah, and it's I just feel like it brings a really good tone. The color is good. The lighting is there. It's dark and medieval and Gothic and no.
I mean, to me, there are aspects of I've found it a bit of a drab watch, and to me, it was the sort of the thematic stuff was what ultimately made me sort of say this is a thumbs up. I thought it was endlessly interesting, and I think sort of weirdly probably more interesting to be watching this now than it might have been 5 years ago. Say it's like it's sort of really this really popped for me, and yeah, it was unabashedly I'm saying this is good Doctor Who, but I don't know. There's something about just sort of cycling through those same few sets.
Oh no! Come on! For a start, the pit, where they have the fight between Grun and...
Yeah, fine, okay, I'll give you the pit.
I mean, Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome is my... which allows me to deploy that Richard Ayoade joke. It was like, two men go in, one comes out.
Yeah, two men enter, one man leaves.
There's a lot of men.
By extension, there's a lot of men in Thunderdome.
Yeah. But... no, I think that with that wonderful Hessian rope netting stuff around, and the fight is really well choreographed. And you know the bit where Grun has the sword, and that's a proper boo moment where a sword is thrown down after he's been disarmed by the Doctor, and he's chopping the axe or the pike, that the Doctor's holding until he's left with just a tiny bit of wood. I mean, all of those things are kind of tropey, or you've seen them a million times before, but it's just nicely done, and I totally sold my heart off to it. I thought it was fantastic. In addition to which, as we already mentioned, the cliff and all that sort of stuff. But you're saying that this is a drab watch. We haven't discussed the ambassadors yet.
No, I mean the delegates are great.
The
fun.
ambassadors are. I mean, the only
you said
only
in a text to
pyramid
us, Lewis, when we were setting up this recording, that I'm not going to defend Alpha Centauri. I'm going to defend Alpha Centauri. I think Alpha Centauri is a hoot.
Look, the only thing that could improve this, and this is perhaps, like they did some extra special effects work in the Five Doctors and that sort of thing, a pyramid of Ferrero Rocher. And other than that, there's nothing to improve here.
I mean, the story, I don't know whether this is sort of true or just fan-received wisdom, was that when Lenny Mayne first saw Alpha Centauri on the set, sort of just declared fairly baldly that it looks like a dick, and then suggested they put a cloak on it, resulting in it's now a dick in a cloak. But I love Alpha Centauri. I think possibly because... it reminded me, and this is obviously much better than Creature from the Pit, but it's something that Doctor Who does occasionally that I really love, of kind of giving these... All the monsters in this are green and blobby, in varying varieties of green and blobby, but they look like, if you got someone just to draw an alien, like a 5-year-old just to draw an alien, that's what they look like.
Exactly.
And yet they're given, like Erato in Creature from the Pit, being essentially like a green sphere with a cock. It has this sort of high-level ambassadorial role, which that disjunct always was one of the few things, actually, I think I really enjoyed about Creature from the Pit. And this, I like the fact that there are child's drawing. I mean, I feel like the Arcturus head model might have actually been made by a child. I'm not sure.
No, whoa. No.
But
let's
they have
finish
these
off an Alpha
quite
Centauri.
nuanced sort of ambassadorial roles and are very well written characters, but they look like that. I mean, I'm not going to criticise the ambassadors at all.
The finest representation of ambassadors outside of Holbein's masterpiece in the National Gallery, I would say. But
I prefer this. I mean, Holbein should have painted Arcturus.
Yeah, no, I mean, very, very genuinely, I couldn't agree more. The fact that, what was it that Sidney Newman said? No bug-eyed monsters.
Yeah.
Here we got the biggest of bug-eyed well,
A giant eye on a dick.
yeah, exactly. And I totally agree with you. If you gave a 5-year-old some crayons and said draw an alien, this is the kind of thing.
Yeah.
And the fact that Doctor Who at this time is just going to go, fine, we'll make that,
That's
and
what
we'll force you to take it and just accept it. But it's done with a sense of confidence and brio. We've said a million times before. You just kind of go with it. No?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm okay. I've been convinced by your words about this, and even though it is a sort of,
All
it's a
opinions are valid.
it's a very odd looking design, but the bit where they're taking the vote and Centauri eventually sort of puts up all three kind of little limbs.
Yeah,
is
they're more
cute.
like prehensile protuberances, aren't they?
Yeah.
Kind of flopping around.
Yeah.
But then, sort of weirdly, that does...
It's a dick with dicks, basically.
Essentially, in the case of Alpha Centauri, that is also reflected in the characterization and the voice. It's not like Alpha Centauri is meant to be there being, "You will kneel before me, Doctor," or something like that, and you're just laughing. It's the fact that it's this sort of shrieky, panicky, slightly fey sort of,
Yes.
and that sort of trotting around walk where the character's sort of bumping up and down as it goes. It's a Alpha Centauri is a character,
Leading to
Yes.
an oddly...
fully developed one, I would say.
Leading to
Can't believe I'm saying this.
a curiously contemporary, as in our era, conversation about its sex or gender between Joe and the Doctor.
I made a note
Where
of that.
Joe says he, or is it a she? And the Doctor says it.
Yeah.
Making clear that it's a hermaphrodite
Yeah.
hexapod.
Get the pronouns right,
And
basically.
yeah, I
Saying
just thought it was particularly interesting that it would be. Yeah, it
It's
was
a-
there. I wasn't reading.
It's a line. I'm not sure if it's necessarily there in that Hales is trying to do something with it, but it's odd to hear that argument being formulated sort of 30, 40 years before it became
Yeah,
a sort of a wider concern.
I thought it was a really interesting
Yeah.
little
It is, isn't it?
little half moment.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
it doesn't need to be there.
No, exactly. It doesn't
Yeah.
need to be there at all. But can we talk about Arcturus?
Yeah, but please.
Because you said, it looked like a bit put together by a kid. I genuinely think it's fabulous.
Right.
A really amazing piece of design. You know, this thing scoots along. It's got those bubbly canisters at the side. Every time he speaks, this green sputum comes out and hits the dome.
And then rolls down the side.
And rolls
Yeah.
down the sides. He's got this creepy skull head with green gloop on it.
Which is sort of not articulated in any way. as
No,
well as-
and yet weirdly the character conveys this kind of distrustful, inscrutable kind of air, and just I just love little bits of comedy.
It's
like
the bit
how-
when he's listening in on the
via the
conversation.
earpiece. And I was like, how can
really
we
funny.
get that this guy's listening in? Well, we'll just attach a wire, and it's like he's going on. But I quite like that, and there are little bits of humour. Like there are bits that are played with a certain degree, with a light touch. So, for example,
Yeah,
when
I think they're meant to be funny.
oh yeah, absolutely, they're meant to be funny. But there are other things like when the Doctor demands trial by combat, and the King's champion is Grun. Right, you'll be fighting Grun, and he's shot from below to give the sense that like wah, wah, and there's actually a Dudley Simpson kind of wah, sort of parp there, and it's just like oh. Doctor kind of gulps and everything. I can't fault this. I think it's absolutely top tier.
No, Arcturus is this the point. I think it was made in the novelization sort of even more, that Arcturus comes from some sort of weird planet with kind of gravity and atmospheric conditions that are very different from what we are. So he trundles around in this equipment. That was a lovely idea, I think. Just that sort of extreme worlds that are very different from the ones that we have and that the Doctor visits all the time can produce intelligent life forms. And it's sort of almost like we now know so much more than they did in 1972 about sort of extremophile creatures that live in kind of sulfuric
Very
vents in the
bottom of
ocean.
the ocean. Yeah, absolutely.
And that kind of Arcturus's world is sort of like this. And it's something that, I mean, reading the book as a kid, I thought, oh, that's a lovely imaginative kind of thing. And that he has to function in sort of what we regard as a normal world, he has to have all this kind of technological stuff, like a kind of big tank that you people go down to the bottom of the ocean in. I just thought that was a lovely kind of way of firing the imagination about how big and strange the universe is.
Yes, agreed.
I would sort of say alongside that, actually, I mean, one of the first notes that I made on this, I mean, obviously, I think the sort of the engine behind this for Brian Hales is what's going on in the headlines, basically, and he's writing about that. But this story does also have a near identical setup to I read last year for the first time Left Hand of Darkness by Ursula Le Guin, which is an absolutely incredible novel. I'm trying to better myself by reading more classic science fiction, and this is one of two novels I've managed to read in about a year of trying to do that. So it's not going terribly well. But that is a story told from the point of view of an alien ambassador who is on this fairly feudal world. I think the novel's from 1968, so 4 years earlier. Alien ambassador on a feudal world that is in the process of applying to join this sort of intergalactic body, and it's told from the point of view of the ambassador of the various levels of understanding of their society that he has to go through in order to kind of advance. He thinks he's going down to just do them a favour by linking them up to these much more advanced planets, but the more time he spends there, the more complex this kind of position becomes. And I just thought it was fascinating. I mean, I'm not sure if that.
When was that written?
So that was published in 1969, and I think was a reasonably good seller. So I mean, there's a reasonable chance that Brian Hales would have read that when writing this.
So you're saying this is a cheap rehash?
No, I don't. I mean, I think it sits beautifully in the Doctor Who universe, and
that's a good save,
and comes at a very timely moment for telling that story. I mean, that was. As I say, we're reading BREXIT metaphors into absolutely everything. But I read Left Hand of Darkness last year and thought, oh, well, this is a book about Brexit that I seem to be reading here. So yeah, no, I mean, it's almost just a sort of side note there, but it's really interesting to see how sort of fertile those ideas were for a lot of writers at the time.
As Hepesh says, everything I know and value will be gone. There's that genuine fear in the pit of his stomach and in his heart that when things change and they'll never be the same again, they won't keep their values as alongside. They will be lost. Yeah, that feels like you don't have to agree with it to accept that that's coming from a very sincere place. And
it's a big deal.
And it's a big deal.
Yeah,
but
absolutely. I mean, that's one of the. I think this is such a good thing about this, that he acts dishonourably, but his heart is. He is in it for kind of utterly sincere motives, and not ones that we would regard as evil. There's another example, I think, of this in the same story of the relationship between the king and Joe Grant.
Yes,
that the king's understanding of love and marriage is very different from Joe's, but it's not an absurd one, and it's not treated as an example of anything wrong with his character. I don't think that his concept of marriage is dynastic marriage, which Joe Grant in 1972 is only a couple of 100 years off. It's not a worthless proposition in some ways. I mean, and in the context of Peladon, that's clearly how things work. So, and it's
actually,
quite
that's fascinating what that spins off into in the paranoia that it injects into the other delegates. That they think that if Peladon is going to marry Joe, then suddenly that strategic alliance between Earth and Peladon is going to destabilise the rest of the Union. Sorry, I jumped in on you there.
No.
That was something that absolutely, I really thought at the time. Oh wow, they've really thought this through.
Yeah. No, I mean this is that sort of real diplomatic history and politics there. Yeah.
So I think we can conclude then in the 2016 referendum, rather than having the government print out all those leaflets and send them round to every household in the UK, they should have just sent them a copy of The Curse of Peladon on DVD. We could be looking at a very different situation now.
Well, with one exception. If they had, then people might have just switched off from the debate, because if they had seen Torbis. Now, Torbis, right, he was the Chancellor right at the beginning.
Right.
Now, he's played by Henry Gilbert, who was an English-born Australian actor, according to a popular...
crowdsourced online encyclopedia.
Online encyclopedia site. And he's got the sweetest gig, because, I mean, he's there for the first, 2 or 3 minutes? gives a fruity performance, and he's off down the pub. So I think if people had seen this, he's probably the most relatable character. Because that is a hell of a shift he's pulled. He's a couple of minutes' work, out of the costume, pint of bitter and light.
For me, sovereignty is the power of a nation to look after what it regards as its best interests and the interests of its individual citizens. And I don't believe that sovereignty is something which you hoard like a miser and cover up in sacking and put in the cellar and go down with a candle and look at it from time to time and see it's still there. Sovereignty is something to be used. And I believe that we are justified in using it, in looking after British interests in the community and the interests of our citizens.
Okay, well, that's us just about done for another month.
I would think so. Lewis, how does it feel to have been I'll explain later?
Seeing behind the magic curtain.
I feel like Matthew Waterhouse coming in on this amazing dialogue between these two stars.
John, you've been manning the social media feeds. Any business you wish to attend to?
Our sack bulgeth again. I'm not going to read any of them out.
Okay.
But we've had some very lovely messages, and
yes, because actually this is the first episode we're recording since we came back.
Yes,
back in March. So
yeah, and I really do want to say a big thank you to all of those who tweeted. There are, happily for me, too many to name. In all sincerity, it's been so wonderful to hear from so many of you that you hadn't deleted us from your feeds.
Incredible, yeah.
Given it's been a year, so that was very heartening, and people couldn't
even be bothered to click unsubscribe.
No, I mean,
that's how much they value. I'll explain later.
Tell your friends if you want to, and if you don't, I'd understand.
Yeah. So if you want to get in touch, you can email us hello@I'llExplainLater.com. You can leave us a message on Facebook, facebook.com/I'llExplainLater, or you can give John something to read during the day as well, @ExplainLaterPod on Twitter. Other than that, we'll be back next month with another 3 Doctor Who stories. But from all of us, see you soon.
Fare thee well. Bye-bye.
See ya. These are all filthy this month.
Yeah.